From the moment the Israel Air Force took to the skies just after 7 a.m. on 5th of June 1967, its aircraft were tracked by the modern British-manufactured radar station on a hilltop at Ajlun, Jordan, some 80 kilometers north of Amman. Despite Israel's deception measures, it was impossible to disguise the scale of the operation. The information was immediately relayed to ground headquarters in Cairo, but the day before the Egyptians had changed the encryption codes, without informing the Jordanians. The vital intelligence was thus now unreadable and the warnings went unheeded. The destruction of the Egyptian Air Force ensued with brutal efficiency. At 8:50 a.m., King Hussein was informed of the Israel offensive against Egypt. Almost immediately, the radar facility at Ajlun reported that hundreds of aircraft were flying from the direction of the Sinai. In a call to ground headquarters in Cairo, Hussein was informed that the Egyptian Air Force was mounting a major counterattack. Encouraged by this news of the impending air attack on Israel, Hussein ordered forces to begin offensive Operation 2. Welcome to another video about the Six-Day War between Arabs and Israel. I'm Arabss, and today we are going to talk about the Eastern Front of the war. If you didn't watch our previous video about Operation Focus, don't forget to check it out. Soon after 9 a.m. on the morning of Monday 5th of June, rifle and machine gun fire crackled across the armistice line into Israel-held West Jerusalem. On 10 a.m. the Jordanian bombardment began, with targets being struck inside Israel proper, including the suburbs of Tel Aviv and Israel Air Force bases. At 9:30 a.m., King Hussein gave a broadcast on Radio Amman informing his people that Jordan had been attacked and that the hour of revenge has come. At 9:45 a.m., Jordanian artillery opened fire on targets in West Jerusalem. At first, the Israel Defense Force didn't respond, as they had anticipated some shelling in the interests of Arab solidarity. Soon after 10 a.m., 155mm shells landed on the strategically vital Ramat David Air Base in the Jezreel Valley. It was this shelling, together with some in the outskirts of Tel Aviv, that finally tipped the scales for a concerted Israel response. At 11:50 a.m., 16 Hawker hunters of the Jordanian Air Force made a series of attacks around Netanya. Soon after, aircraft of the Iraqi and Syrian air forces struck at targets in northern Israel. At 12:30, the Israel Air Force struck back, and within 9 minutes, both Jordanian military air bases were rendered inoperable. A second strike at 13 p.m. completed the destruction of the Jordanian Air Force in just 52 sorties. In Jerusalem, Jordanian infantry occupied the United Nations Treaty Supervision Organization headquarters in Government House. Israel used artillery to reply the Jordanian action, and part of Israel infantry was sent to counter the situation at Government House. They smashed through improvised Jordanian roadblocks and pillboxes at the entrance to the UN post. Here they were caught by heavy artillery fire, but despite the devastating barrage, they rescued the United Nations forces and restored the United Nations headquarters. Israel infantry then continued its assault and by nightfall had captured Sur Bahir, a village that located astride the main Jerusalem-Hebron road. As part of the general offensive, Central Command initiated the isolation of Jerusalem from the bulk of the Jordanian forces. To the north, Israel mechanized forces moving up the Jerusalem corridor to break through the Jordanian positions and to seize the mountain ridge and road that connected Jerusalem to Ramallah. This area was the key to controlling Jerusalem because it controlled all approaches to the city. The assault began during the afternoon of 5th of June, and by the next day the strategic ridgeline was in Israel's hands. On the afternoon of 5th of June, in the northern end of the West Bank, Israel infantry ordered to eliminate the Jordanian heavy artillery units equipped with long-tom 155mm howitzers, positioned at Yabad, that were shelling the Ramat David Air Base in the Jezreel Valley. At about midnight of 5th of June, news came through that intelligence had intercepted enemy radio transmissions, indicating that the Jordanian armored forces was advancing along two axes. Qabatia Junction represented a vital strategic objective because it dominated all the surrounding area. As first light approached, the race was on, and whoever got there first would in all probability win the battle. Meanwhile, other operations in Samaria were underway, now fully supported by the aircraft from Israel Air Force, which, having dealt with the Egyptian Air Force, had then turned its attention on the Jordanian and Syrian Air Forces. Israel infantry advancing on two axes had made their way towards Yabad in the west and Jenin in the south. Israel mechanized infantry had fierce battle with the Jordanians, but eventually secured the area, then moved on to take the Qabatia. Undoubtedly, one of the major factors in Israel's favor was total air supremacy. It hindered every move the Jordanians made and rendered any movement of troops in daylight liable to summary attack.
In the next video, we will talk about the next days of the war that ended with the occupation of the West Bank. See you there!